Hello again. My name's Peter Gurry, and this is 66 Times and the X-Ray, where we take a good hard look at the marketing technology and how it impacts the guts of your business. In this episode, we will be again focusing on the Salesforce State of Marketing report for 2021. And in particular, we'll be zeroing in on artificial intelligence and how marketers plan for the successful adoption and use of artificial intelligence and maybe what they don't consider as well. There's many points of confusion around artificial intelligence. And in my words, artificial intelligence is definitely the future. Note my inflection there. However, at present, we're very much in a fuzzy logic state. Now, what is that? Artificial intelligence versus fuzzy logic. Artificial intelligence, it denotes self-reliance. It denotes decision-making capability. Now, we're not there yet. Fuzzy logic requires human intervention. The process isn't running on its own. It has to be informed. Artificial intelligence does not require supervision, whereas fuzzy logic is manual and highly intensive. There's a lot of confusion that is definitely influencing marketers' decisions to invest in the artificial systems, or what are being promoted as artificial systems. One of them, as we were just saying, AI versus machine learning. And again, there's a lot of facets to the products that are described as artificial intelligence. One's black box, white box, and an emerging area of ambiguity, grey box. Now, black box is one that is fully system contained. You buy an AI tool that does an AI task, and you don't have any control over it other than it is to say that it's enabled and it does a specific task. If you wanted to change the way it thought about that task, well, you can't. Well, that's the other end. That's white box. If you wanted to have a great deal of a say about the way that task was performed, as in specifically how it was structured and the decisions that it was making and the observations it was drawing on, well, then that's white box. That's what you have full control over. Now, grey is obviously a hybrid. Also, what is actually an ROI definition for AI? AI can be one of the biggest cost commitments a marketer can make, depending on which direction we take. When we look at the State of Marketing report by Salesforce, they've done a great job of uncovering the perception of investment. There's a great deal of intent to invest in artificial intelligence. And you can see here, leaders versus those who are underperforming. Everyone seems to be committed to some level of AI being implemented. Now, the big question I ask here is, why? What's behind this? Now, the need to increase the pace of CX response. Let's flip that statement on the head. Everyone's used to saying, well, customer experience is king. Customer experience is so broad. The demands of customer are so great. It's hard for any team to keep pace. Right, so that's obviously one. Now, another is and more contentiously, is to bypass the limitations of the team's current abilities in terms of their availability or their skills. And the third, C, to use a artificial intelligence platform or system to in turn bypass other legacy systems in place. And D, the old favorite, all of the above. And I would say D is probably the more accurate. There's a bit of everything in a business's decision to pursue an AI-driven something. It makes it compelling. When we look at what the report says about the team skills and the marketers' confidence in their teams, it shows a great deal of lacking. If you were to be on a path towards intelligent marketing, and more owned intelligent marketing. You see here data proficiency, agility, science itself, and the coding and deployment, well, also the data analysis. These are all areas that within the businesses are lacking. This definitely supports the team readiness proposition and how compelling that point is. Now, again, in the same report, the State of Marketing report, we look at what is said about the confidence in data, customer data. Again, a great lacking in confidence. You can see here the high performers have a great deal more confidence in their trailing competitive peers. However, it's still lacking. These 3 points here are support points for why marketing leaders are investing in AI-driven systems, because their current systems are well lacking in regard to the timeliness and integration. So there's an intent to solve the problem with the AI system itself. But definitely the biggest thing here that I see as just enormously concerning is the confidence in the data itself, because you can have highly timely, highly integrated data sets with crap data. Now, you obviously, the old crap in, crap out situation exists there. You can see why marketers are making these decisions to adopt AI, and in particular, AI systems. So what we're seeing here is AI systems are naturally becoming a decision that marketers make to bypass their own limitations. But what I've just exposed here is a list of concerns, which the following slides are going to zero in on. So AI requires intense governance. If you're existing outside of the black box area, and it's fair to say that everything that I've exposed here, where I'm talking about system-based, the vast majority of that will be black box, meaning, just to remind you, it's wrapped up. It's wrapped up in the system itself, and then you've got very little control. And any control that you may have would not be the sort of control that you describe as being competitive advantage. Your IP would not exist. It's the platform's IP. So anything that moves into the white or grey area, I'll just refer to for a moment, and that is what is more competitive advantage driven. White or grey will require intense governance. You've got to be mindful. Anything that you're controlling yourself is going to be prone to modification. When you run something like a next best offer, and that next best offer is on site, yet you're making constant changes to your CRO and your CX on site, well, then each time you make a change to that website, and if that website doesn't sit within the core system itself, well, then the logic to that next best offer is pretty much moot, right? It'll either need to start learning again, it'll need to be altered altogether, but there's a point in which your change makes your next best offer model inaccurate to a point where at some point it is merely obsolete, or inaccurate to the point where it's making dramatically wrong decisions and causing brand issues. So there's a lot to consider here. That's black box and what it means. White box, what it means is effort and maintenance. Well, you've got the control, you need to maintain it, and you need to invest in it. Your people need to be on top of it to make sure that any model is being run is being changed in line with other areas of change in your ecosystem. Something that you need to start with before you invest in any real program, and that is, what is untapped, right? So if you're going down a path of real investment, not one that you simply turn on or off, right? If you're really going to consider what it is to scale up your team, what it is to have highly structured AI logic, well, then what is already in your business by way of its intellectual equity? And also, what is the cost and the governance of the evolution of your tool? One, your black box takes all that away. It takes all the nightmare away. But what it also does is take the competitive advantage away. Everyone's singing from the same hymn book. The platform decides the most relevant use cases, the broadest use cases, the use cases and the logic that describes the needs for the most, not the few. First takeaway, determine if your AI goals are long or short term. This will be black box versus white box. And in that, what is the impact on revenue? What are the expectations of control and longevity and your intellectual property and your competitive advantage? What are the expectations of cost? And what is the IP opportunity loss if you don't go down this path? Takeaway number 2, establish a baseline for AI success. I noted before the mention of opportunity loss. Now, in this instance, baseline for AI success, we're talking about expert intelligence that exists within your business. Sweating your expert intelligence basically means using the smarts that the people in your business already possess, using the information that is within arm's reach. And to achieve that, you need to solve several problems. Those problems are how to extract that information and build those matrices efficiently. And the question is, how often do you update it? How often does that become too costly? Your AI has to kick into gear when it exceeds your intellectual intelligence. So at some point, you should have 2 models running, and so begins a new era. But 2 will be in existence at one point in time. 1 just waiting to take over. Takeaway 3, establishing another baseline, an operational baseline. And you obviously don't need to really consider this in a black box model because that decision-making and that maintenance is taken off of your hands. But what is implied is that the data quality that you maintained and are in control of, if you are feeding information into a black box model, well, then that is to be considered. When you are considering your operational baseline, it's the things to consider are the systems in which play a role in the model itself, the implementation costs of maintaining those systems and making modifications to the governance associated with it, and the enhancement of it. Takeaway number 4, assuming you've decided to go and invest and build competitive advantage via AI. Well, I would strongly suggest creating 2 ROI models. One being a platform cost simple and somewhat standard view of ROI, which shows a short-term view of payoff, and running an outcome-driven ROI model. And now what outcome-driven means is looking at ROI in terms of an outcome such as your revenue or satisfaction over operational costs. So achieving some revenue or customer satisfaction goal and attributing the ROI cost to that goal, assuming that AI is going to be a massive part of steering the satisfaction and steering the revenue. Well, then you also need to look at the cost of it. And again, another comparative outcome-orientated ROI model, conversion impact over breadth of exposure. So again, the cost of the model versus the conversion rate that it drives and the breadth of exposure that conversion rate has on your customer. So obviously your cost will be high if you're going down a path of competitive advantage-driven AI. And for that cost, look at the conversion impact and the breadth of conversion events. Look at the breadth of exposure and create your view of ROI off of that view. These outcome-driven ROI are more attuned to competitive advantage than one that your competitor may be using. So that was a very rapid and very intense look at artificial intelligence. Now, just very quickly recapping, because we went through quite a bit. The takeaways we discussed, determining your long or short objectives. Again, we've understood clearly those marketing leaders that are using AI-driven systems to supersede their own limitations. But that is one set of needs. That is, and that lends you to working within black box models, which don't necessarily give you your strategic advantage. But do satisfy short-term needs. Establish that baseline. If the smarts and the intelligence, the intellectual intelligence of your people can achieve a certain outcome, you need to know what that is. And you need to creatively solve that problem before handing it over to some sort of artificial environment and comes at additional costs. Establish operational baselines and what it means to maintain the general governance around the brand experience and the data quality. All these things need to be considered at either black box or intense white box. Defining ROI in a language that steers competitive advantage and your own IP. Don't use a standard ROI model if you're not planning to be standard. If you're planning to be unique and using your competitive advantage, well, everything, including your ROI model, should steer that. Okay, well, that has been rapid. It is possibly contentious, but that's the point. I hope you're able to make good use of this. My name is Peter Gurry. This is 66 Times and the X-Ray series, and I hope to speak to you again shortly.